everyone. My name is Kendra Seymour from Change the Air Foundation, and I want to welcome you back to our mini class series on testing options for your home. Now, this series is designed to help you understand the strengths and limitations of some commonly available testing methods for your home when it comes to mold, water damage, and other indoor pollutants. So if you've joined us previously, we have discussed air testing, ERMI, EPA 36, EMA testing for mycotoxins, surface samples. And you can actually find those talks if you haven't seen them yet by going to our website, changetheairfoundation.org, and you click on My Resources and then scroll down to the mini class tab. And these resources are all free and they're available for you so that you can feel empowered when making decisions for you and your loved ones. So for today's talk, we're going to be talking about bacteria testing, which has gotten a lot of buzz and attention over the last few years. And so I am beyond thrilled to welcome back Mark Levy, who's going to take us through our mini class series. Thank you, Mark.
Hi, how are you? Good afternoon to you.
I'm super excited for today's talk, and I'm going to let you jump right in just a moment. But for everyone listening, I want you to do me a favor. If you haven't already, head on over to changetheairfoundation.org and sign up for our newsletter. And you'll see that sign up button right at the top of our website page, because at the end of this series, and we're almost there, we have one more coming out after this with Corey Levy. We're going to be releasing what we're going to call a testing cheat sheet guide. And this guide is amazing. I've spent the last 9 months working on this. I have reached out to all the brilliant people I know for their feedback to create a resource for you that really will help you take that deeper dive into testing options. And it's going to have resources where you can look into individual types of mold and more, and samples of different testing options so that you really understand what's available for you. So the only way to get that, though, is to sign up for our newsletter at changetheairfoundation.org. So don't miss out on that opportunity. All right, that said, Mark, I want to let you jump right into your presentation today, because I know we're also going to do a Q&A, and we're going to ask about some other follow-up questions that we've gotten at Change the Air Foundation. So I hope everyone listening stays with us through the end, because the Q&A is going to have some great information as well.
All right, well, I'm already queued up and I appreciate that. And thank you for giving me an opportunity to share information about Bacteria Testing 101 today. And that's what we're going to be talking about. And so today what we're going to cover is the type of water loss. And that's going to be important to understand why there is really a big emphasis on the kind of water that's being basically lost within your home. We're going to talk about common bacteria. I'll get into different types of bacteria that are there. And then we're going to get into the bonus question and answer session as well. But first off, let's talk about the different types of category of water loss, because when you think about it, when you have a water loss, there's actually different types of water that is coming from various types of areas. Now, for example, when you look at the IRCRC S500, they have created a category of different types of water events that could occur. And there are 3 different types of categories. Category 1, which would be clean water, which in their mind would be sanitary. And that could be coming from a water supply line, things of that nature. But I would argue that there's really no such thing as clean water, because at the end of the day, once it hits the substrate, it becomes dirty and actually would migrate into what we call category 2, which would be gray water. And gray water is really defined as significantly contaminated type of water. And that could be coming from a dishwasher or washing machine, different discharge, could be coming from different types of toilet overflows, things of that nature. But you got to keep in mind that these categories of water loss, they can migrate over time. So just because you have it released at the time that it's released doesn't mean that it will continuously be a category 1 or category 2. The more that time expires, the more it can graduate to really what the worst would be, which would be a category 3. They claim it to be black water. What that could be is like a sewage loss. It could be actually wind-driven rains from hurricanes or tropical storms. It could be water that's migrated in from floods, things of that sort, but it is grossly contaminated type of water. So all of these different types of water events actually have some severity that's associated with it, and it could carry certain types of various types of contaminants, such as bacteria. And that's one of the things that we want to talk about today is bacteria, because bacteria is really the most commonly overlooked type of organism or contaminant that's in the home today. What happens is that people, when they have a water event, they focus their attention on mold and the possibility of different types of molds and maybe toxins from those molds that can grow in the home. But what people may not be aware of is that the true primary colonizer in a water event, it's not mold, it's actually bacteria. Bacteria can grow within hours, whereas certain types of molds could take upwards of 24 to 48 hours to grow. So there are various types of common bacteria that we find within homes that can actually be of a severe health consequence. And the first one I want to talk about is really, we'll give you a list before I get into that, but there's total coliforms and E. coli and enterococci. I'll talk a little bit about that. There's endotoxins as well as actino, or what we might call actinobacteria. But let's get into each one of them individually. So total coliforms, E. coli or enterococci, are very common types of bacteria that actually are from sewage losses or certain types of category 3 water losses. And keep this in mind, typically when you're dealing with like E. coli or certain types of coliforms, especially fecal coliforms, they could be coming from warm-blooded animals. Well, we don't have animals in our home that basically could be just leaving feces around the home typically, but people need to understand that when you have a water event, whatever on the outside of that home could actually get pulled in and migrated into the home with that water event. The other thing too is that let's say that you have an issue in your attic or maybe an issue in the basement and you have mice droppings that are in there. These are all different types of ways where these particular warm-blooded animals can actually contaminate your home. So when you're dealing with these types of organisms, total coliforms, E. coli, they actually could be of a gram-negative as well as gram-positive type of basis. And we'll talk a little bit more about the difference between gram-negative and gram-positive. But the key thing is that this particular type of bacteria can actually be of a major health consequence. So you're going to want to test to see what's going on for these organisms within your home. And typically what we do is that we look for the presence or absence of those types of organisms. And so we utilize a sterilized swab. And what we do is that we take that swab and we actually collect from all the areas of where the water had migrated to and from. And then what we do is that we actually send it to the lab and it's cultured. It takes roughly maybe 24 to 48 hours. And if it does grow, then it's going to give you an indication of whether it's there or whether it's not. And so here's an example of a typical type of lab report that we actually use. Sewage contamination in buildings is the name of this particular type of sampling methodology that we use. And again, we're looking at the presence or absence of these organisms. Now, let's just say that you can see here that E. coli is not present, which is actually an organism that could be of a gram-negative bacteria. And there's enterococci that's not actually present. Does that mean that it's okay? Well, we know that it's not living there, but we do see a presence in terms of the total coliform. So we're going to want to establish a proper remediation strategy. But keep in mind, let's just take, for example, that all of these organisms came back absent. That would be good that they're not showing that they're live, but what we want to keep in mind is that there's certain types of bacteria that can actually produce certain toxins, like an endotoxin, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So why is it important to test for a sewage loss? After a sewage loss, rather, it's because of the fact that it is a health hazard. It also is going to validate whether we have any kind of pathogens that are in our home. And it really helps establish the proper remediation strategy in terms of what we need to do to correct the situation. And if you are an individual that has health issues, you absolutely want to make sure that your home is being properly tested before and after to make sure that the organisms are either there or not there before, and then exceptionally after the fact, you're going to want to make sure that it's been cleaned properly as well. Now, these reports are ideal if you do have any health issues to actually compare it with your doctor, because there's different types of clinicals that you may have that can help you identify if these have any association to the way that you may be feeling. So we talked about endotoxins. Endotoxins actually are from gram-negative bacteria. And we mentioned earlier that in that particular water event, that even if there's not an absence of those organisms from a live perspective, they could actually have the residual of these dead organisms that are there. And what happens when these gram-negative bacteria actually die off, there's a substance that's bound to the bacteria cell wall. As it disintegrates, it actually breaks apart and releases these endotoxins, and these endotoxins now harbor in the dust. So as you are going about doing your day-to-day activities, typically what happens is that the dust that could be layered in your home could get resuspended in the air and then get into your actual breathing zone. It could also get pulled into your ventilation system. As it gets pulled into the ventilation system, and as the ventilation system is actually being used, it's perpetually distributing this contaminant throughout your home. So it's really important to understand that these organisms, these toxins, they harbor in the dust, and the dust becomes the enemy. So what does that mean? Well, we want to be able to test to see if there is any kind of endotoxins in your home. And the way we do that is through the dust. So what we do is that we typically take a Swiffer cloth and we go through various rooms in the home and we collect the dust. We go into these dust reservoirs and we collect the dust, very similar to an ERMI type of collection methodology. And so if you want to be able to see how we do that and get a good overview, I would reference the collection method for ERMI in our mini class 3 series that we did before. Now, when you get the lab report, very simple. It basically gives you an understanding of what's going on within your home in 3 different types of measurements. Anything that's less than 200 would be normal levels. Anything that would be, for example, 200 to 1,000 would actually say that there's further investigation that's going to be required. Or if you're doing some type of cleaning and you want to kind of validate the cleaning to see the efficacy, then there's certain more steps that need to be taken to do further cleaning. And anything that's over 1,000 is indicating that there is basically going to be remediation that's needed. Now, endotoxin, it is a very severe type of toxin that could disrupt your system, and it's something that if you find it in your home, you should be discussing that with your doctor and talking with your doctor in terms of any types of issues that you may be dealing with from a health perspective, because most of the time what happens is that people are focused on maybe molds and their toxins, and they're not even focused on the different types of other organisms or toxins that could be in their home. And this is really giving you a sense of another piece of information that could be applied in terms of optics to give you an understanding of what's going on within your home. Now, why is it important to test? Similar types of reasons as we talked about before. Again, we just mentioned it's a huge health hazard. These endotoxins that are in your home, they can wreak havoc on your upper respiratory system, your GI gut. There's just so many different things that it can do from a disruption perspective in terms of your body. It gives us the ability, when we identify it, to really establish the appropriate remediation strategy. Again, people that have health issues, it's so important not just to focus your attention on one type of contaminant in your home, but to look at the overall type of issues that you have. And bacteria, as we talked about, is the true primary colonizer. They're going to be in your home, and you're going to want to be able to make sure that you compare that with other things that are going on with you from a health perspective. And that's where the doctor and you will be able to take that information to make the comparisons together. Now, let's talk about Actinomyces and Actinobacteria, another form of bacteria that actually grows hand in hand with mold in water damaged buildings. And what's interesting is that it is a gram-positive type of bacteria, but characteristically very similar to that of mold. It can actually sporulate, it can create MVOCs, which are those musty odors, and it can create biotoxins. And the immune response to actinomyces, very similar to that of mold exposure. And what happens with it is that these organisms, they harbor in the dust. So again, the dust becomes the enemy. And when you're dealing with actinomyces, it's really a major health hazard, because what happens is that the inhalation of these actinos creates a large amount of inflammation throughout the body, and it also has the ability to create these biotoxins, which could really create disruption with a lot of different issues that could be going on within your body. So the sampling methodology, again, very similar to that of what we would do with the ERMI collection. It's the collection of the dust. You're going into several rooms within the home. You're picking up the dust from various types of dust reservoirs. And again, what you can do, if you want to see how you can do a collection, I would reference you to the mini class that we did on ERMI. So let's take a look at the Actinomyces report. They're going to give you a scoring system. And I will say to you that when it comes to the scoring system, I don't really pay a whole lot of attention to the scores. Obviously, you can see here that this is a red zone, which is telling you that there is a suggestion that it's building-related illness. But at the end of the day, it's really important to get into the specifics in terms of really what's there. So I always like to go to the summary page. And when I look at the actinomyces, I'm looking at the abundance or the bacteria equivalent per milligram. And if it's something that's close to 1 million bacteria equivalents per milligram, that's telling me that there's going to be an issue within that home when it comes to elevated counts of actinomyces. So this is a really good indicator right here in terms of the elevation portion of it. But what gets even more detailed, and what I really like about the Actino report, is the isolation and the detection and the listing of all the different types of bacteria and species that are in your home as well. And why is that important? Because you could take this report, give it to your doctor, and now your doctor can see all the different types of organisms and species that are in your home and what you're being exposed to. Some of these may not have anything to do with the way that you're feeling and may not even be an issue for you to worry about, but there can be certain types of bacteria and species that are there that may have an association with the way that you're feeling. The other thing that you want to look at is the fact that it does give you a overview of exactly elevation compared to what a normal distribution would be within a home. And you can see with the asterisks that are here, any type of asterisks that you can see on the report here could either be 100 or 1,000-fold higher than what the average home could be experiencing in terms of levels that are there. So it kind of gives you a good indication of what's going on within your home. This particular situation in this particular report, you can see that there are issues of elevated counts within this particular home. So why is it important, again, to test for the actinomyces? As we talked about earlier, it's a health hazard. This is something that is one that grows hand in hand with mold. So you really want to be able to see if there is the existence of these actinos within your home. It's definitely going to help give you the ability to actually establish a remediation strategy. And again, these findings are going to be one that's going to be very, very helpful for your doctor. So if you are having health issues, this is one of the things that I would really steer you towards, is to look at the actino levels within your home. Keep in mind, though, actinomyces, they come from many different types of sources, typically 3. It could be found in the soil. It can actually be found in water damaged buildings, as I mentioned to you, and it can actually shed from your body. So you want to make sure that you keep in mind that there are different sources of where these particular organisms can come from. And that's really where you want to gain a distinction of that report that we just reviewed with you, so that you can share it with your doctor to see if it really has anything that is really creating a problem with you from a health perspective. So let's talk about prevention. How do we prevent all of this? Because this is, the end of the day, the most important thing. It's really all about moisture. As we have been saying all along, that the reason why you have an issue within your home, it's really the amount of moisture that develops within the home, whether it's high relative humidity, whether it's actually fluid water that comes in from a particular type of water break from a pipe, whether it could be a situation where you have water intrusion issues. The most important thing for you to do is to keep your place dry. And if you do have an event, you want to make sure that you handle that as quickly as you possibly can. The second thing is clutter. Clutter is really our enemy. The more you have clutter within your home, the more difficult it is for your home to be actually clean. It reduces and restricts air circulation. It enables dust to be able to accumulate so much easier. And we talked about this before, dust is your enemy. So the key thing, eliminate the clutter, removal of the dust. The more dust that you remove, the better you are in terms of removing the different types of molds and bacteria and toxins within your home. So you want to have a routine cleaning regimen that you want to do. Every week is something that I would tell you that you want to focus your attention on and really be an individual when it comes to your home, being more of a minimalist, right? Minimize the different things that you have within your home so that you can actually have a home that's easier for you to clean, easier for you to maintain. And if you do have health issues, I would tell you right now, that's probably the most important thing that you want to keep in mind is the fact of being a minimalist, removing that dust, and having a week-to-week type of cleaning regimen that's going to actually help you maintain that home. If you have pets, keep in mind that when you bring your dog, or some people may walk their cats, who knows, or let their cat out, you want to bring them back in, clean their paws, wipe down their paws, because they could be carrying things in from the outdoors that could actually create issues within the home. Implement air filtration units. I like these units because it continuously helps clean the air. And do proactive maintenance. Don't be reactive. Take a different type of a list of things that you want to tackle every year, whether it's having a plumber come out and check your plumbing. Many times what happens is that people basically get clogged pipes, they get clogged drains, they get all these different things. You can have somebody come out every single year to make sure that you check those things, make sure that you're maintaining and looking at your ventilation system. That is one of the key areas that gets compromised in terms of not being properly maintained. What's interesting is that there's studies that are out there that really only 42% of the people that have HVAC systems actually do maintaining of them on a consistent basis. Isn't that crazy? So you really want to be able to look at that because that's the lungs of your home. So that's what I had for bacteria for today. What I'd like to do right now is to go into our bonus section and we'll talk a little bit about any type of questions and we'll see if we can provide you some answers to that.
That is great. Thank you so much for that. And I know because watching bacteria discussions over the last, few years, people are talking about it, but it's hard for people to know, well, what exactly am I looking for and where are the sources and where does it come from? And I think too, I'm glad you mentioned that, for actinos, the three sources, because one of them can be from your body. And so you don't necessarily need to have a water damage issue for that to be elevated in your home. So I guess my question then to you is, when it comes to bacteria, is the protocol for removing that from your environment different from the protocol for mold remediation? Is it the same? So if I have elevated levels of bacteria, basically, how do I get rid of it?
Yeah, it really depends on the event that's there, right? So if you have a category 3 water event and it touches certain building material, then that building material needs to be removed. And that's one of the reasons why you really want to understand the different types of category that's there. And many times people work with their insurance company on a water loss, and they only have a certain amount of dollars that they're going to be able to have towards that claim when it comes to mold. But when you're dealing with a water loss, typically you're going to get more of a type of dollars back on that claim because you're looking at the water. Same thing with the bacteria. This is why it's really important to focus on the water and the bacteria, because they know, meaning the insurance companies know, that if it is a category 3, they know that that material should be removed. This is something that's outlined in the IRCRC S500. And so that's a key thing. So again, I want to emphasize the fact it really depends on the type of category of water loss. That's why it's really important to test for bacteria. If there's bacteria that's there, you're going to want to remove that building material to make sure that there's issues that are there. You may test for mold, and there may not be any colonization of mold, but there may be colonization of bacteria. And if you didn't test it, now you're putting yourself in a situation where it's going to be in harm's way. So that's why it's so important to test in terms of not just for mold, but also for bacteria as well. And then getting back to the question about the remediation strategy, it is very similar. You're going to want to be able to establish proper engineering controls. You're going to want to be able to actually remove those building materials that need to be removed. And you're going to do a very similar type of cleanup that you would do in a mold type of scenario.
That's really helpful. Thank you for that. And I think this is why too, it helps to work with like a knowledgeable indoor environmental professional. And we have resources on our website about how to find someone, because if you're trying to understand this all on your own, it can be overwhelming. Hopefully this series is helping, but there are people out there who can help walk you through this process and make those decisions. So I want to shift for a moment. We're not going to do a whole episode, Mark. We talked about this. There are a couple other testing options out there, and I thought we could shift for a moment and talk about that. And the first one I want to talk about is that mold plate or gravity plate testing, because you can maybe walk into a Home Depot and you see the Petri dish and, you know, the picture of the mold colonies growing, and they're all different colors. And, you know, they're becoming more and more popular, I think, because of the, you know, it's something that's pretty accessible to people. So can you give us your thoughts on that? What are some of the strengths and limitations of that type of testing?
Well, first off, what I want to say is that you have to keep in mind that all sampling methodologies have limitations to it.
Yeah.
And so one is not going to be the end all in terms of giving you information that you need, especially if you're dealing with these Petri dishes, because what you want to keep in mind is that when you're dealing with settlement, it's all about airflow and air dynamics, right? And so that shifts so much when you're dealing with a home, right? It's all based on pressurization. It's based upon various types of activity of what's going on within the home, mechanical system in terms of you utilizing your heating and air conditioning system, opening and closing windows. So all the dynamics of the air shifting is going to create the ability for these things to settle accordingly. So air sampling has a lot of variability, is my point, because of what I just explained to you. But the type of sample that you're going to be doing now really has huge limitations from the standpoint that you have to have it settle within the particular Petri dish. The food source, the agar that it's using, actually has to be the right type of food source for the kind of molds that are there. Not all molds grow within the type of food source that they have within that Petri dish. So you could be missing certain types of molds. The other thing too is that it's only going to create growth of organisms that have spores that are live spores. There could be many different types of fragmentation. It could be certain types of spores that are what we call non-viable, non-living. They do not have the ability to grow. But those organisms could be actually carrying certain types of toxins that are there that you're not even aware of. And those, what I call fragments or particles, are going to be in the magnitude of what you're actually capturing on those sheets, or we'll call it the Petri dish. The other thing too is that many times when you have these molds that grow, it's going to be competitive with certain types of molds. And there are certain molds that are more aggressive. So you could have, for example, cladosporium or certain types of penicillium or what have you that could be growing on the Petri dish, and it could be overshadowing other different molds that could be there. And so it's really not giving you an indication of what's going on from that perspective in terms of the different types of molds that are in your home. The other thing is that it doesn't really tell you where the problem is. you look at that petri dish and you're going to get really scared because you're going to be seeing all this type of mold growth that's there, not knowing what it means. Could be different types of color variations. Some could be black, some could be green, some could be white. What does this mean? All molds in themselves, they have different types of color, types of growth and formations that are created. It doesn't really tell you anything. If you want to get scared, then go out and buy these petri dishes and put them in your home, because at the end of the day, mold is everywhere, and you're going to have mold that's going to settle in there, and there's going to be mold growth. So the idea thing in terms of what you want to do with your home is that you really want to understand the history of your home, where the various types of events have occurred, and really focus in on areas where you clearly see where there's water damage, or you know where there might be trapped moisture. Those are going to be significant areas that you want to hone in on, because that's where the mold is going to be harboring, or maybe even bacteria, because as we talked about today, they grow hand in hand. So the key thing is understanding, again, the history, where the water originated from, where it migrated to, any kind of footprints like staining, paint peeling, buckling, separation of building materials. Those are going to be key areas that you want to be able to look at, and keep in mind what you see may only be the tip of the iceberg.
That is incredibly helpful, because I can't tell you the number of times I've seen, like, online, people will post pictures of the petri dishes and they're full and they're freaking out. And you have to explain, well, they're designed to grow mold. And, I appreciate that statement about how there are sometimes more aggressive molds, and the fact that certain molds may not grow on it just because the food source doesn't make sense. And even things we've talked in the other episode, something like Stachybotrys, which is heavier and stickier, right, isn't
That's
as
right.
likely to become airborne over the 5 minutes you have that petri dish. So at the very least, one of the other takeaways is, I like that you said if you want to freak out, you can buy that test. But no one can look at that by color or amount and tell you the species. Just to reiterate this point for people watching, you're going to have to send it to a lab to be analyzed. And so I appreciate that clarification there. Okay, so one of the other things that I've seen become increasingly popular over the last few years, although it's not as widely available, are mold dogs. And there are various companies out there who have trained their dogs to sniff out sources of mold growth. So similar to how I guess the police force and FBI and everything use canines to sniff out drugs and other things, these dogs have been trained to identify apparently areas of mold growth. So can you speak to a little bit about that?
I can, and I'm going to give you an opinion of mine, and it's
Sure.
going to be one that's going to be probably either agreed with or not agreed with. But I think that there's some moral issues that are here, right? Because I'm a huge dog lover. In fact, I own a dog. I'm so blessed. She's 14 years old, and my dog is part of my family. I look at her as one of my kids. And why would I want to put my dog in harm's way? I wouldn't want to do that. And think about this. First off, when you're dealing with mold, you're dealing with some serious types of organisms that can create health issues. In fact, most of the time, people are bringing other individuals into their home because they are sick. And so when you do that, when I go into somebody's home, one of the things that I do is that I protect myself. I wear proper PPE, which is personal protection equipment, so that if there is any kind of exposure that's there, I want to minimize that exposure. But these dogs, they're not having any kind of protection at all. Yes, their senses, in terms of their sense of smell, is unbelievable, but it shouldn't be used in that type of format. That's my opinion. And there are going to be other people that are out there that are going to disagree with it. But my point is that when you're dealing with molds and toxins, they always will tell you that it is going to be harmful for humans and animals. And I can't tell you how many clients that I've dealt with where they have had their animals, whether it be a dog or a cat, that has actually passed away. And they really talked about how they really believe it's because of the mold exposure. And I agree with them. And I know what mold could do. So one of the things that I would tell you is that people can look at that from the standpoint, if they think that it's okay, in terms of it's not that immoral to do, that, yeah, I want to use a dog sniffing mold dog because I think their senses can help me understand what's going on. Well, just understand this, it's only one tool in the box. And what I mean by that is that these dogs, they can only go to certain areas. They're very limited in terms of where they go. They're not going to go up into your attic area to check what's going on in your attic. They're not going to go into your crawl space. And they're certainly not going to be able to open up your ventilation system and see what's going on in your ventilation system. So what you really need to understand is that when you're investigating for mold, you have to understand that the most important thing that you want to do is identify where these particular mold sources may be. And I'm going to tell you, most of the time when you're dealing with mold, it's hidden. And it's not just behind walls, it's not just behind in as well as inside cabinets, but it's in areas where you can't reach as an animal. And so who would want to put their dog into a crawl space? Nobody would want to do that. Plus, you'd have to train how to do proper type of investigation when you're underneath there. The key thing is this. We have so many tools that are out there that we don't need to put our animals in harm's way. It's not something that I would recommend to do from a moral perspective. And because of the limitations, you're not going to be getting all the information that you need. And from my point, in terms of what's going on out there, in terms of how they're using dogs. Like I said earlier, I love animals. I think dogs are one of the most precious species on earth, and I would never, ever want to put them in harm's way. And that's what they're doing.
Yeah, thank you for that. I appreciate your opinion and insight on that. There are so many options out there. And I just to reiterate one more time, and it's something you'll see on our website, that there really are no perfect tests. And every test has those specific purposes and limitations. And you really need to understand what that test can and can't tell you, because you need to combine it to make that bigger picture that's so important. So one of the things before we move on, because I do want to ask you about another testing method, is over the last several months, we've talked about air testing and ERMI and all those things. And at the end of the day, I think the question people want to know is, this test, is it good? Is it bad? So let's talk for a moment about understanding these test results big picture, because there's something called normal fungal ecology. And I'm going to ask you to explain that to everyone again. I know we covered that in one of the earlier episodes, versus what might be considered elevated, or sometimes you'll see IEPs or mold remediators are looking for certain like red flag molds or indicator molds. So can you talk to us about, big picture, what's normal, what's not, and why does the government not have any kind of recognized standards or permissible exposure limits?
Yeah. That's a really good question, and it's really kind of a difficult one for people to answer, and I'm going to give you my opinion on it. And first, before I do that, I'm going to talk a little bit about the different conditions that are there. So you have, and this is an IRCRC type of definition, you have condition 1, condition 2, and condition 3. Condition 1 would be normal fungal ecology, which is just basically normal trappings. And what that means is that mold is everywhere. And so when you go into a home, you go into a building, you're going to have various types of molds that are going to actually settle throughout. So it would be really the type of mold spores and fragmentation that would be of a scenario where it's just normal trappings. A condition 2 is actually the elevated counts of mold spores that are in high concentrations throughout an environment that are the byproduct of an actual condition 3, which is where you have the growth of the mold itself. So now what happens is that you have a condition 3 that could be a source that's hidden behind a wall, or could even be something that is staring you right in the face. They're going to actually, through its life cycle, they're going to disperse these particular spores. Fragmentation becomes airborne and starts to settle throughout your home. You now have another condition called condition 2. So when you're dealing with mold, there are actually 2 sources of contamination. It's the physical growth of the mold itself, condition 3, and it's the secondary byproducts, the spores, the fragmentation, and these toxins that become airborne, and then they settle throughout the home. That's another another source of contamination, and it's one that's most often overlooked, and it's what you're being exposed to. So those are the two different scenarios when it comes to the type of contamination that's there. And what I would say to you, when you're dealing with a situation where you're testing and you're looking at lab results based on certain types of areas that you're concerned about, you want to look at the reason why you're testing that area. So for example, the most important thing that you want to do is you want to understand, was there a water event that occurred there? If there was a water event, did it create any kind of water damage? So if I have staining or paint peeling or buckling, there's going to be a strong likelihood, more likely than not, that there's mold that's going to be harboring behind that particular material. The other thing too is that when you look at the results that you sample, whether it be a tape lift or a swab, you have to take into consideration that not all samples are going to be the same. In other words, what I'm saying there is that that particular sample, a surface sample with a swab or maybe a tape lift, could actually be overshadowed by other molds that are there. So in other words, we talked about the dominant types of molds that grow. Molds not only create dominant type of growth in a petri dish, but they could do the same thing in a substrate within your home. So it could overshadow different types of molds that are there. And if you're picking up high counts of cladosporium or alternaria and you think it's just a normal outdoor mold, it may be concealing other molds that you can't even see. So at the end of the day, you want to look at the conditions in terms of what the water damage looks like itself. You do want to test, and the reason you want to test, you want to try to identify if there are certain molds that are there that are indicator molds. Now, indicator molds are molds that are created through water damage, excessive water damage. So for example, like Cottonium or Stachybotrys or Eucladium or Fusarium, all high water content molds that grow that are indicative of certain types of water damage. If I see those within small concentration, I know that there's a problem that's there, even if I'm picking up small amounts of that. If I see Aspergillus or Penicillium, again, water damage molds that are there. Now, people would tell you, well, there's Aspergillus and Penicillium on the outdoors, but they don't know what type of Aspergillus and Penicillium that you're picking up in the indoors. What I mean by that is that there's different species. Penicillium has over 300 different types of species of different types of organisms that fall into the Penicillium group. Same thing with Aspergillus, has over 80 to 100 different types of species of different types of organisms that are there. How do you know that the species that you're picking up in your indoor is the same species that you're picking up on the outdoor? You don't know that. So at the end of the day, it's not just doing the comparison of what you're seeing on the outdoors versus the indoors. You have to take a look at what's going on in your home and the activity and the damage that you're seeing from a visual perspective. Getting into the other factor as far as whether you look at things from the standpoint of what's going to be high or what's going to be low, everybody reacts differently when it comes to mold. So when you're sick, your hypersensitivity levels are going to be at a point where even low amounts of certain types of molds may be impactful to you. In many cases, what we find is that people that are actually living with a family, they may be the person that is ill, the only one in the home that's experiencing these issues. And everybody else in the home, they're not even having any problems. That is very common, by the way. We see that all the time. Because what happens is that whether you're basically having an issue or you're not having an issue, it's all based upon various factors, right? It's your genetics, it's your previous exposure, and it's your current health position. Those are going to be all the different differentiating factors in terms of whether you're going to be experiencing any kind of exposure to a point where it's going to be impacting you. So that's why when you look at it from a governmental perspective, they really can't create certain types of levels that are going to be of an issue because of the fact that there are individuals that are out there that have hypersensitivity issues, that even small accounts of molds could be impactful for them. So at the end of the day, it's all about making sure that you take care of your home. It's about eliminating the The issues with moisture, that means you want to correct the moisture source. That's the number one thing that you want to take care of. If there's any kind of water damage that's there, you want to be able to test accordingly and make sure that if there are certain molds there, it's going to help establish the remediation strategy. People out there will tell you don't need to test. I disagree with that. You always want to have a baseline of what's there. It establishes the different types of methods and ways that you want to go about doing the remediation, appropriate type of containment engineering controls. And then it's really going to give you, if somebody's within the home that are sick, I'm going to tell you, you got to be very, very careful of just opening up walls without making sure that it's properly contained. Because if there is something that's there, and I said more likely than not, there's going to be something behind these walls, it's going to get released. And when it does, it's going to impact the entire home and make matters worse.
I'm glad you brought that up. It's a little like letting the cat out of the bag, right?
Yeah.
So stop, as tempting as you are to be like, well, I'm just going to open up that drywall. I just want to peek and see what's behind there, or I'll just take it all down and we'll deal with it if there's something there. It's stop and take a moment to think. Thank you for that, because to kind of summarize kind of what you were saying, I think one of the things people see is they just want to know, is X amount of this mold safe and why not? And it's really not that simple. So no one can look at this and say, with any sort of government guideline to reference, this is what's safe and this is what's not, which is why we always recommend that you work with a knowledgeable IEP and remediator and your doctor to determine, what makes sense for you in that situation. Because I think the lowest bar, in my opinion, and it kind of just pains me when I see this, is, and I was told this early on, well, the total outdoor spore count is about the same as the total indoor spore count. And it didn't take into account the individual types of mold. We had some of those indicator molds you were talking about, which should have, been a sign for us to dig further. We later, ended up having to go back and revisit those areas. But thank you for that, because it's been tremendously helpful, I think, helping people understand a little bit more. So I know we're very low on time, but I do want to, just one more test I want to talk to you about is VOC testing. Can you tell us what VOCs are and kind of where they come from and how you might test for that, just high level?
Absolutely. I would tell you, well, first off, VOCs are volatile organic compounds. These are off gases from various types of cleaning products, chemicals, could be from building materials that are there. Paints, adhesives, things of that nature. All of these different types of volatile organic compounds can actually create an environment where you could actually start to have symptoms. And many times people can have headaches, they can have asthma type of issues. So you really want to be very, very careful with the way that you're storing certain types of products and how you are using those products. And you really want to pay really close attention to what the manufacturer is stating on that particular label. So when you're dealing with cleaning products, people tend to want to use more as opposed to less. And the more you use, the more you're creating that odor, that VOC that is emanating throughout the home. And so that's one thing that I would tell you, is that really take a look at the cleaning products that you're using. Some of those cleaning products could actually be one of a cancer-causing type of scenario. So the more that you're using, the more you're putting yourself in an exposed type of manner. I'm a big believer in using really good products that are really safe and environmentally safe from the standpoint of being a cleaning product. And there are a lot of products that are out there that you can use that actually don't have harsh chemicals, that don't have these VOCs. So you really want to pay close attention to that. Garages are notorious for people to store paints, adhesive, gas. All those basically are going to create off-gassing and the ability for that to travel into your home and create problems. And even certain types of new furniture or maybe new carpet, they off-gas as well. So at the end of the day, what you really want to do is you want to pay close attention to the products that you're buying. You want to pay close attention to how you're storing these items. And you want to be making sure that when you use these products, that you're using in a high ventilated area so that you're not going to create a situation where you're going to overexpose yourself. So VOCs can be very, very problematic. It's something that if you have an illness, especially people that have mold illness, they could become hypersensitive. A lot of times people have reached a point where they now become chemically sensitive. So now what happens is that they can't really deal with a lot of odors. And so it's going to really be another form of focus for them to really pay attention to the products and ways that they're using these products and storing these products to enable their home to be one where it's going to be acceptable for them. So at the end of the day, it's focusing on that and creating good solid ventilation to dilute the air to bring it down to a level that's going to be acceptable for you.
So that's not something a homeowner could test for on their own, though. They'd have to work with like an indoor environmental professional or someone similar, correct? To kind of test for
There may
ventilation.
be some companies, meaning laboratories, that are out there that can send you some kits. That's something you want to go ahead and research yourself. They can give you a step-by-step type of instructions on how to do that. And they can send you a report and you got to get an idea of what's going on within your home. So there are labs that are out there, I do believe. I won't mention any of them off the top of my head, but there are labs that I think that if you're a homeowner and you want to test your home for VOCs, they can send you out a kit.
Yeah. And we're going to have more resources coming this year in 2023 on VOCs and getting into other things like carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, radon, and all those other things that can really impact your indoor environment. So be on the lookout for those. Mark, I want to thank you so much for taking us through this series. I know this is a lot of work, and you have really been super patient taking us through each of these testing options. So thank you so much for your time and dedication to this.
My pleasure. And I'm just so grateful for what you and this organization is doing. It's really critically important for us to create the awareness that's out there. Obviously, you know it better than anybody because of your background and your experience with what what can happen to you within a water damaged home. And so there's millions of people that are out there. They're not aware of what's going on within their home. And if we can have a small part of creating that awareness, giving them the tools to be able to be their own self-advocate, that at the end of the day is really what's going to make a difference and get people to have a better quality of life. And the only thing that I would leave with people is that take the time to learn. Take the time to understand what's going on within your home. Use the materials that you can find on this website. It's going to be something that's going to give you an enormous amount of information to help you not only learn about what's going on and how it can be impacting you, but it gives you the ability to actually be your own self-advocate. I can tell you that there's so many people that are out there that are really in fear. And it's really sad. And the fear really is because of the unknown. If you have the knowledge and if you have the wherewithal to take that knowledge and create a plan to correct it, there's no fear. It takes away the fear. And that's really why I really want people to hone in on being self-educated, becoming their own self-advocate. And at the end of the day, if they do that, then their life is going to be on the right direction and they're going to be able to put themselves in a home that's going to be a healthy home for them to have a better quality of life. And that's what we want. That's what we're looking for in terms of being able to help people.
Mark, I couldn't agree more. So thank you for helping people make that connection between their health and their home. And for everyone listening, we're going to have one more in this series with Corey Levy, and he's going to kind of bring things full circle. And it's all about building a sampling plan, meaning deciding which of these tests to run based on your goals. If you're a renter, if you're a homeowner, if you are considering litigation. And so be on the lookout for that as we wrap up our testing mini class series with the Levys. So thank you so much. And don't forget, if you haven't, head on over to changetheairfoundation.org because it really is the best way to get information like this and that testing guide I mentioned earlier directly to your inbox. Thank you so much. Have a good one.